I wasn't supposed to be there that night. Not in that apartment, not on that couch. And definitely not in the quiet space that would later reshape the parts of me I thought were ruined forever. But life has this way of pulling you into the very places you swore you'd never return to. It bends your boundaries, rearranges your beliefs, and leaves you standing in the middle of your own unfinished story, wondering how everything fell apart so quietly. I used to think my life had a predictable rhythm, steady, warm, safe. I believed love was a promise you made once and kept forever. But sometimes love doesn't end with a breakup or a fight. Sometimes it dies in silence, in the spaces where two people stop reaching for each other. When he left, he didn't even look me in the eye. 5 years reduced to a note taped to the fridge. A rushed apology, a key tossed aside like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I remember staring at that key, its cold metal cutting into my palm. And for a moment I couldn't tell if the sting came from the edge or from the truth that everything I built had slipped out from. Beneath me, the days that followed were filled with a kind of silence that didn't soothe. It screamed. It echoed through my chest, making my thoughts unbearably loud. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called Hannah. My best friend since childhood, the one person who could hear heartbreak in the way I said her name. Before I could explain, she interrupted softly, her voice steady with certainty. "Pack a bag. You're staying with me tonight." She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. That was the kind of friend Hannah was, decisive, gentle, instinctively knowing when someone was breaking. I agreed without hesitation. Escape felt like oxygen. I couldn't stay in that apartment, not with his ghost still lingering in the cushions. Not with memories clinging to every wall. Hannah's place was different. A tall old building at the edge of the downtown district. The kind of building that carried history in its bricks and sunlight in its windows. High ceilings, warm wooden floors, and light that spilled in like it was trying to paint over every sorrow that crossed its path. Even in silence, that apartment felt alive. When I arrived, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You'll have the place to yourself for a while." Adrian's away for work. Adrian, her older brother. I remembered him vaguely from school gatherings. The quiet one. The musician who preferred sitting with his guitar over joining noisy circles of conversation. Back then, he had always seemed just slightly out of reach, as if half of him lived in another world entirely. Knowing he wouldn't be there was a relief. I needed solitude, not the awkward presence of someone who barely remembered me. For 2 days, I drifted through the apartment like a ghost. Drinking coffee I couldn't taste, staring out windows without seeing anything at all, letting time dissolve into shapeless hours. Then, on the 3rd evening, the front door creaked open. I froze, my breath catching. Footsteps carried through the hallway, slow, steady, familiar in a way that made something deep inside me shift. Adrian. But he wasn't the boy I remembered. He had grown into a man who carried silence differently. It wasn't emptiness now. It was depth. His dark hair was tousled in an unintentionally intentional way, soft shadows hugging the angles of his jaw. A gray t-shirt, worn joggers, and a calm energy that filled the space without demanding it. When our eyes met, he offered a small, polite nod. Just enough acknowledgement to break the invisible wall between us. "Hey," he murmured, his voice low and warm, like something that settled into you without asking permission. I managed a quiet "hi." That was it. Our first conversation in years, 2 syllables. Suspended between strangers who somehow weren't strangers, the days that followed blurred softly. We barely spoke. A simple smile in passing, a gentle thanks when one of us moved aside in the kitchen. The kind of quiet coexistence that somehow brought more peace than loneliness. It suited me. I didn't want connection. I wanted stillness, space to breathe, to recover, to remember who I was without the weight of heartbreak. But silence has a funny way of filling itself, of shifting from empty to comforting without asking if you're ready. One evening, unable to bear the walls pressing in around me, I left for a walk. The autumn air bit at my cheeks, crisp and honest in a way nothing else in my life felt. Leaves danced across the pavement as the city hummed softly, alive yet tender under the glow of flickering streetlights. By the time I returned, the apartment smelled faintly of rosemary and red wine. Adrian was reclined on the couch, one ankle resting on his knee, a half-empty bottle breathing quietly on the table. The TV cast a soft glow over the room. A romantic comedy Notting Hill, starring Sophie Marin in that iconic scene that always made people sigh. I set my keys down and teased gently, "You like this movie?"
He looked up, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth.
"Only when I'm depressed," he said. And something inside me, something broken, something exhausted, cracked open just enough for laughter to escape. My first real laugh in weeks. 2 glasses sat waiting on the table. He didn't invite me, but he didn't need to. I sat at the other end of the couch, not close, but not far. The movie carried us, filling the space between us with familiarity and warmth. When Sophie Marin whispered her famous line, "I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to love her," Adrian's gaze flickered toward me. Just for a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, something in the room changed. Days slipped into weeks like soft pages turning. We fell into unspoken rituals. Morning coffee shared with quiet smiles. Grocery notes left on the counter in a handwriting I began to recognize instantly. Evenings ending with the gentle glow of a movie neither of us fully watched. Our conversations were simple, almost fragile. But beneath that simplicity, something unspoken hummed, the kind of slow-growing connection that you don't notice until it's already wrapped around you. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something softer. A warmth in winter. A presence that reminded me healing didn't always come loudly. Then one night, I couldn't sleep. The clock blinked 2:47 a.m. The world outside was quiet, untouched. I wandered into the living room, barefoot and wrapped in an oversized shirt. Adrian sat on the couch, his face carved by the dim glow of his phone, his eyes distant yet peaceful. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head. "You too?" He set the phone aside and patted the cushion beside him, a wordless invitation that made my breath catch. I hesitated, then sat. The silence between us was heavy, but not suffocating, more like a place to rest. After a moment, he asked, "Do you miss him?" The question hit deeper than I expected. I stared at the rug beneath my toes, tracing patterns in its fibers. "I don't know," I whispered. "Sometimes I wonder if I ever really had him." Adrian turned toward me, his expression unreadable, and said quietly, "Maybe it's a good thing he's gone." Not harsh. Not pitying. Just truth. And something about that truth made my chest ache in a way that felt real. I looked at him, really looked at him. Searching for judgment. Expecting pity. But all I found was steady calm, like he understood what it meant to break and survive it. My voice cracked as I admitted, "I think I'm more afraid of being wanted than being alone." His breath hitched softly, and when he leaned forward, his whisper barely touched the air. "Myra, you've always been wanted. You just never noticed." The words struck with quiet force, unraveling something inside me. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, charged. His hand rested near mine, not touching, but close enough that my skin felt the heat of him. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, my heart leaned forward, and in that breath, something shifted that neither of us could take back.